research project Embrace is all about understanding how communities are preparing, coping with and recovering from natural hazards, what an Embrace researcher would call community resilience. This video will focus on a Northern England case study which was led by the University of Northumbria, supported by the Stockholm Environment Institute. In the UK, people have had to deal with unusually large flooding events over the last decade. One of the worst flooding events happened in 2007 when 55,000 properties were flooded across England, with economic impacts calculated as being £3.2 billion. In 2009, the National Assessment of Flood Risks in England claimed that 1 in 6 properties are at risk of flooding. Responsibility for flood risk governance in England is shared between the Environment Agency and regional and local authorities. Following the 2007 flooding, recommendations were made that authorities should work in partnership with the communities to help them prepare for the risk and get involved in decision making. The Local Resilience Forum, a partnership between the emergency services and other responders, also aims to build resilience at county scale and below. For the Northern England study, a defining event was the 2009 flood in Cumbria, which affected more than 2,000 homes. We will now follow a journey through the catchment of River Derwent and visit towns and villages affected by the event. Here in Borrowdale, hill farmers suffered extensive damage to their most important improved pasture land, which sits at the bottom of the valleys, and which during the flood got covered with gravel that impacted on grazing and fodder production. During the recovery, a compromise was reached whereby farmers participated in the decision making over which pasture land would be restored and which sites would be managed under natural flood control. The rural villages of Braithwaite and Low Lalton were severely affected by the flood. However, residents realised that due to the magnitude of the event, they had been effectively left on their own to deal with the impacts, which included the loss of important bridges and the rescue of several residents. Following the flood, community-based advocacy groups in both these communities worked with authorities to develop useful mitigation measures and plans, but many are still conscious of the risks of future floods. In Keswick, despite the presence of an active flood action group and a coordinated response to the onset of the flood, parts of the town were severely impacted for the second time in 4 years. Residents again faced many months of disruption before getting back into their homes. The Flood Action Group took a leading role in advocating for structural measures in the town, which were finally completed in 2012. You can see the flood walls displayed on the screen. The social network mapping exercise done with the Flood Action Group members illustrated the importance of key individuals and their links to authorities. The 2009 flood also caused unprecedented impacts to Cockermouth's commercial centre, with water reaching more than 2 metres in the main street, as you can see in the image. Here, the recovery that took many months resulted in the town being left in many people's eyes better than before. See, for example, this quote by a local businessman. Once again, advocacy by the town's Flood Action Group and the Chamber of Trade led to a new flood defence infrastructure for the town. But the community felt that these defences couldn't protect them from a repeated high magnitude event, and therefore that other actors were equally important, such as insurance, manifested in the shown quote. As in other towns, the long-term nature of flood recovery was identified here as needing equally long-term support from the local authorities, especially for more vulnerable households. Now we are heading all the way to the sea and the town of Workington, which experienced catastrophic damage. With the 3 principal bridges destroyed, The town was split in two, with residents needing to commute many miles for trips that would normally take a minute. 60 houses here were also flooded. Bridges were eventually replaced. However, in the case of private homes, circumstances were less straightforward. Structural measures to protect the most vulnerable households to the same levels as in other towns were unaffordable. In Workington, advocacy was limited to gaining support for emergency response rather than flood mitigation. Across these different communities in the Cumbria catchment, there were some commonalities. We found that, in order to mobilise after the 2009 flooding, three factors were essential: relationships and networks within the community, emergency services, and the support from social protection actors, that is, local authorities and voluntary groups. Together, these elements effectively boosted the resilience of the area. The mix of these three key elements is illustrated in the social network map, showing the overall picture of flood management. Using the Embrace framework to study these different communities, it was found that their community resilience was dependent on a diverse and dynamic mix of resources and capacities, actions and learning. The study came to the conclusion that even in the close spatial confines of a short river catchment, it should be understood that different communities need to access and use different resource sets to maintain their resilience to hazards. You could say that one size does not fit all. You can read reports and find out more on the Embrace website.